Season 4 of The Dragon Prince has finally arrived, and its coming feels like a strange, distorted dream after waiting for so long. And yet, its being here has made the wait worthwhile. It's as challenging and thoughtful and heartfelt as one could possibly want the show to be. Darker and more ethically nuanced than the first few seasons of the show, Season 4 depicts a world that has transcended the simplistic binaries that caused so much suffering and turmoil in the past, and yet this transcendence does not bring an Arcadian wonderland of peace and reconciliation, but rather a feeling of discontent and malaise. There is no threshold that once crossed brings pure healing and revival that makes all troubles and sorrows go away. Instead, the doubts of the mind and the darkest parts of the spirit start reasserting themselves, and those can be much more difficult to handle than external threats, and they can wind up bringing out evils and temptations that are far more difficult to destroy than pure antagonistic foes that summon armies of evil zombies. Viren is not necessarily the enemy here in Season 4. Instead, the greatest enemy is the kind of torment that destroyed Viren's mind and made him from a somewhat morally ambiguous figure into such an obsessive villain. The experience of fragmentation and malaise and the desperate dream that one source of wisdom, one plan will bring it all together, will make whole what has been broken. But life doesn't quite work like that, and easy temptations can lead one easily to the wrong path. Some temptations are successful, some aren't. Whether they are successful depends heavily on the support the characters have, whether they have a strong sense of themselves founded in a coherent and convivial sense of community and history and strong connections. And those kinds of connections are hard to come by in a world so defined by uncertainty and doubt. There are moments of true heartbreak this season that carry as much power as they do because they are built on structures that have been built up for the last 3 seasons. These structures of complex and nuanced relationships that can't easily be pinned down into a simple, fun catchphrase or trope. After 3 years, The Dragon Prince is still the same show it has always been. It still has a deep, passionate, compassionate heart. It still demonstrates soaring battles and a sweeping, gorgeously, achingly beautiful score. So wistful and elegiac. It still has a few corny jokes and a few moments that don't work quite as well as they should. But for those who have loved the show for its first 3 seasons, Season 4 is just going to deepen and further that love. It is a season that takes what worked about the first 3 seasons of The Dragon Prince, the true and essential heart of the show, and introduces that heart to challenges and difficulties that are less easily combated than the more straightforward villains of the first 3 seasons. Now, that's not to say The Dragon Prince has been completely devoid of psychological and internal conflict before this point. Far from it. Callum's doubts about trying to establish his identity as a prince in an environment where he is pushed to the margins and is left struggling, yet in that struggle is somehow perfectly in harmony with a world that is desperately trying to figure out its identity. And he's also in harmony with Rayla, who at first appears to be completely different from him, saying as that she's so confident and she's such a ferocious fighter. But she also suffers from perhaps even deeper existential pangs, a sense of uncertainty and being unfit for the role that she's trying to play that refuses to go away and eventually forces her to enter into the difficult process of re-examining her previously held beliefs and values and seeing how they hold up to her actual experiences. All of this psychological and sociological weight has been there before, but it is more present in this season because of how it's exposed by the creeping darkness that defines this season. The show deals with the unraveling and unrolling of the grandiose, triumphalist climax that comes at the end of Season 3. Victory may be sweet, but even if it is lasting, it's tenuous, and there are complications that cannot be swept aside or ignored. Aaravos is the main villain of this second half of the show. I think it's obvious to say that, but Aaravos is more interesting to me when he is functioning as the tempter, as someone not necessarily corrupting perfectly good people into hardened villains, but rather drawing out the darkness and the violent, tempestuous unease that is already there. Claudia is the most clear example of this, and her story in Season 4, wherein she must try to save Aaravos so as to save her father, is one of my favorites. I appreciate the show taking the time to sketch out the contours of her story so as to demonstrate how haunted she is by the scenario in which she finds herself. There is a bit too much exposition throughout the season, but that's been a minor problem with the show for its entire run, so I won't belabor the point here. What's essential is that Claudia is here the one who's most gung-ho about bringing Aaravos back, even more so than Viren, which marks a sort of reversal from their dynamics in the first few seasons. The end of Season 3 leaves her character on the precipice of fully leaping into the monomaniac obsessiveness that has threatened to consume her for a couple seasons, and in this season, she fully leaps into that abyss and must face the consequences. The show handles her arc well in that it demonstrates both that she is a victim in this circumstance and that her scenario that she must confront is neither right nor just nor fair, and yet she is still somewhat to blame for what happens. No one is forcing her to make the grotesque choices that she makes. If she had wanted, she could have left Viren dead, mourned him, and then gone back to her brother, Soren, and the others, who would certainly have at least tried to forgive her. But she doesn't do that. Instead, she stays committed to her father. She stays committed to his grandiose dream. While Viren actively believed in the cause of saving humanity, as misguided as he might have been by the end, Claudia is more concerned with personal grievances. She wants that closeness that she's always received from her father, that sense of being justified in what she believes and feeling safe and secure and not having to question herself. That's been taken away from her, and that is a definite loss. Callum whose story is very closely paired up with Claudia's this season, suffers quite a similar loss. He's lost both his parents, Harrow, his stepfather, and Sarai, and he is so isolated from the people around him this season. In episode 1, Rebirth Day, they're all enjoying themselves, celebrating, and just embracing the sort of calm and serenity that comes after victory, and yet Callum cannot join them. He is apart. He's lost not just Rayla, although that loss desperately pains him and causes him agony, but he's also lost that sense of normalcy, that sense of being able to relate with the experiences of those around him, and because of this, he's become deracinated. He's become uprooted from this happy-go-lucky, joyous community that he kind of wants to be a part of, with Soren and Ezrin and all the others who are largely more or less the same as the people they were before. And yet Callum has a commitment to ideals beyond merely what he believes will satisfy him in the moment, that Claudia, so overwhelmed by grief and obsession, does not. These characters are in somewhat similar circumstances, and yet they respond in entirely different ways. Claudia's response is to fully commit herself to a dream of this serene, happy family with her father as the noble, wise leader. That was never entirely true, but is completely hollow now. And yet she's so desperate to hold on to that old dream that she's willing to send the world into catastrophe. She is aware of this to a certain extent, and yet she can't pull herself back. Claudia has always been a bit myopic, especially regarding the use of dark magic, and the Dragon Prince reveals in a lovely little short story about her bringing a childhood pet back to life that she has always been like this, always trying to hold on to what's been taken from her. And her inability to accept the finality of loss causes her to unleash so much suffering upon the world. Callum, meanwhile, manages to rise above his suffering, not to ignore it, but to fight through it and try to repair his relationship with Rayla. I do wish they had given Rayla more screen time. I do wish they had devoted more time to the difficulty of repairing this relationship. And I do think a lot of people who haven't read Through the Moon are going to be confused, but the show knows what it wants to be about this season. It wants to be about this unraveling of these reassuring triumphs at the end of Season 3 and the dealing with these lingering feelings of loss and alienation, and the difficulty of trying to respond to these feelings in a productive way in circumstances that are as dire as those Callum and Claudia face. They don't really recognize this world as the one they once knew now, and they have to try and figure out in their own ways, for better and worse, how to handle that. So thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can, and you want to see more videos like this. Keep watching The Dragon Prince. Season 4 is everything I'd hoped for. I'm not sure it's the best season of the show, but it is absolutely a season that develops the themes and ideas that have interested me so much, especially in Season 3. I hope it enchants you all as well. Anyway, tune in soon for next analysis. We'll be coming soon, promise you that. Thank you all again. Adios, comrades.